What does the last 10% mean? I like this term, and I think that some people like it more than others, but this is the term we use, the last 10%, to refer to the small details that have to be exactingly carried out when we refurbish a car. And I want to talk to many of you about this because it's very important when you're getting your classic Mercedes restored to make sure that the shop is going to see you through the last 10%, or if you yourself are performing a refurbishment of your classic Mercedes, that you are able to carry out the last 10% with proficiency and with a dedication to a very good high-level final result. Now, what exactly comprises the last 10%? Well, these are the loose ends, the small ends, unrelated repairs, degrees of refinement that have to be carried out in major systems of the car. A good example would be in Group 1, which is engine housing, the first group in the Mercedes Benz parts catalog. Does the engine leak anything? Does the engine, cylinder head, cylinder block, oil pan, etc., does any of it leak? It's the first thing I'm looking for. Right before I send a car back, I want to test drive it and check for leaks. Now, some leaks are very, very subtle and are difficult to improve or repair. Often what this means is I can look at a leak and say I'm going to try to mitigate this tiny little leak that might produce a drip of oil if the car is parked for like 3 weeks or so to the best of my ability, but we didn't pull the motor out and take the engine apart. So there's no reason for me to assume that it's a completely correctable problem. However, some customers really obsess about having a leak-free car. This is a great deal of stress in the last 10% because you're hoping that all the major repairs you did to mitigate oil leaks, replacing oil pan gaskets, front crankshaft seals, valve cover gaskets, injection pump gaskets, turbo drain tube gaskets on an OM617 engine, oil filter housing gaskets, oil cooler lines. All these things actually produce the cumulative result of no leaks. The second thing that we find is that there might be discrepancies in the car's electrical system. I'm not talking about major electrical function or functional issues. I'm talking about things like one dash light is too dim. A turn signal stock doesn't stay in the neutral position. The fuel gauge bounces a little bit when it gets to be 1/4 of a tank. The auxiliary fan doesn't come on exactly when it's supposed to when you're in stop and go traffic with the air on and the car starts to overheat. While these are all items you've tried to address and account for, sometimes the repairs didn't go as planned and you have to take a deeper dive into them, but often you don't find these things out until the closing days of when the car is about to go home and you're undertaking extensive preventative test driving. Another area we see the last 10% rear its ugly head is with fuel mixtures, idle adjustments, hot starting, and other things pertaining to the running nature of the car, particularly at idle. I can't tell you how many M116, M117, M103, and occasionally M110 engines I've sat there obsessing over the idle mixture to make sure the car started and idled smoothly, as well as had perfect and consistent off-the-line acceleration without bogging or stumbling. This is a tough one because depending on where the car is going in the country, depending on the temperature and the type of fuel being used, these variables can change. The good news is they're easy to adjust. Sometimes we don't make these adjustments properly and we have to walk the owner of the car through the adjustment. Sometimes they can't make the adjustment. We have to go to them to spend 5 minutes adjusting, the idle mixture or adjusting how the car starts. These are all things we're happy to do, but it is an unfortunate burden of getting the last 10% right. In fact, I would describe it this way, and this is very important if you're refurbishing your own classic Mercedes. The first 90% that you did is worthless if the last 10% isn't quite right. Because without the last 10%, the car doesn't feel like a sorted car. It doesn't feel like a car that runs and starts well. It doesn't feel like a car that dozens of hours have been invested in. And the last 10% isn't really over until you send the car home and you get the phone call from the customer where they say, hey, this car that you put together for me is actually a lot better than I thought it would be. And then you wait for something to go wrong. Anyway, I hope you guys like this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and our clients who have patiently waited for us to complete the last 10%, and trust the process, because the process is never over. It just gets easier after you go through the other 90%.